we're standing here by this tractor here. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Certainly. This is the all-wheel drive, better known as the Dane tractor. It was built in 1918. A little history before that. Deere decided to look into the tractor production area of the market in about 1912, where they designed one tractor. It's called the pull motor. It failed miserably, but it was patterned after the Hackney motor plow. And when it failed, they still thought it was a good idea to look into the tractor market because it might hang around for a few years. So they tasked a gentleman by the name of Joe Dane, who owned and operated the Dane Manufacturing Corporation that we acquired in 1910. Joe was a pretty forethinking individual, a lot of mechanical aptitude, so he went to work and designed 5 prototypes of various versions of this style of tractor. He died, unfortunately, in 1917 on his way back from a testing exposition that he was doing up toward the Minneapolis, Fargo, South Dakota area, and he died in Minneapolis. So in March of 1918, they decided to go ahead and build 100 of these units, and it was actually managed by his son, Joe Dane Jr. At the same board meeting that they approved the manufacture of these 100 items, they also approved the purchase of the Waterloo Traction Company. So we went from having no tractors in early 1918 to having 2 lines of tractors instantaneously. Like I said, Joe was pretty forethinking. He had a lot of great innovations built into this tractor. Unfortunately, when manufacture started, the expected retail price was about $1,500, which is quite high in 1918, compared to what you could buy a Waterloo Boy for around $900 to $1,000. So there was a great disadvantage at that point. Again, went from no to 2 tractors with an automatic dealer network built in place with the Waterloo traction tractors already being sold. So through a little bit of time, they realized that the Dane was not going to make it in the marketplace, so they discontinued or didn't renew the additional tractors being made. There's only 92 tractors known to be made. Of those 92, there's only 2 known to exist today, and this is the most complete one of the 2. So this is a pretty unique tractor to John Deere. It is the first John Deere tractor, 4-cylinder tractor, to carry the John Deere name. So quite interesting.
Can you kind of explain to us some of the real special features?
Sure. Be more than happy to. First thing you can notice is the 4-cylinder engine. We didn't have another 4-cylinder engine until 1960. So again, way ahead of its time. The water pump, a gear-driven water pump. We didn't have a gear-driven water pump until 1986. Same way with a mechanical front-wheel drive. Didn't have that until 1986 as well. This unit had a key switch. Didn't have that till the 40s. Had shift-on-the-go transmission. Again, we didn't see that until 1960. So a lot of innovations were built into this that were way ahead of its time that we didn't totally discontinue. We just didn't reuse again until much later in our tractor production.
Now, were they painted? Was it painted this color when it was used?
Near as we can tell, there are no actual colored photographs of the tractor. They're all black and white. This tractor was restored by another individual, and so far we can't find anything to prove him wrong, but this is as close as we can tell to what they were actually.
Now, you said this is the most complete one.
Yes.
Of the 2 in existence. Are there any parts missing from this tractor?
There are some parts missing in this tractor. There are some parts that have been removed out of the system but are still attached to the tractor just because they quit working and another application was put in place. Prime example is the fuel system. The vacuum fuel pump system was marginal on a good day. It has now been converted over to more of a gravity, so it's still on the tractor but is non-functioning.
What else is missing from the tractor?
What else is missing from the tractor? That is probably the biggest thing that's missing. They've got some hoses in place of copper lines, but you know that's normal repair that could be fixed at any notice.
And there's one other thing that, this is a very noticeable thing, is that it's a 3-wheel tractor.
It is a 3-wheel tractor, yes.
Single in the rear.
Yep, the single in the rear, just the opposite of what normal tricycle type tractors are today. I'm not sure what the technology was behind it, but it definitely made turning a lot easier with the single wheel in the back rather than working the two wheels on a differential. Granted, you move the differential to the front wheels, but it made steering just a lot easier when it was pulling instead of being pushed.
Huh. In terms of success, you know, and customer satisfaction, were people satisfied with it even though it was expensive?
From all accounts that we read, it definitely had its place in the marketplace. It's just not a wide enough appeal. The folks that purchased it were pleased with the power. It only had 12 horsepower at the drawbar. Of course, today we make walk-behind lawnmowers with that kind of horsepower. But it was adequate that way. It was adequate for traction. It weighs about 4,000 pounds. For only having 12 horsepower, it's a pretty good horsepower to weight ratio to overcome. So they were fine that way. The big thing was the price. I mean, in the late 1900s, or excuse me, in the late 19-teens, there was a farm crisis again. We were getting ready, heading into the Dust Bowls in the early 30s, so, you know, people had to watch their pennies and nickels like they do today.
Okay. Can you kind of show us the back part of the tractor with the operator?
Sure. Being a three-wheeled tractor, it had some unique advantages or disadvantages. Of course, you had to look over such a long nose, which the other competitors didn't have, but you had a large steering wheel with a rack and pinion that made steering quite easy. You had your clutch engagement, disengagement right here. Your emergency brake or your parking brake was right here, one and only brake to the tractor. But it kept you away from the heat of the engine. It kept you away from the dust being kicked up from the wheels, and you could see your implement with great ease, very similar to what the horse-drawn folks had when they had horse-drawn equipment, because they would sit on the equipment, they were very close to it, and that was their monitoring system that they used to make sure everything was operational, the planters were working, the discs weren't plugged, the plow wasn't being drugged in a non-productive manner. So it gave them closeness to the equipment that they're used to with the horse-drawn equipment. Again, we're at that transitional stage where they're going from horses to mechanical farming, and some folks made that adjustment a lot easier than others. So everything that the manufacturer could do to help with that, helped that transition. Okay. One of the companies John Deere worked very closely with prior to 1910 was the Marseilles Manufacturing Company. They specialize in manure handling equipment, manure spreaders, pitchforks, that type of systems. In 1910, one of the companies that John Deere acquired was the Marseilles Company. They were located at one point in Marseilles, Illinois, moved here to Moline, where we started making the manure spreaders here in town. Early on, we started off with lettered manure spreaders, A, B, C, D, E. Different trucks underneath, different carriages, different capacities. The higher the letter, the bigger the capacity. This was a horse-drawn, where you had two horses up here. There would have been a seat attached to this bracket that you would have sat over your product in the hopper. As you went to the field and wanted to start unloading, you throw your levers ahead, which started the beater system in the back to spread it, and then the wooden conveyor to move the product toward that spreading system for application to the field. And of course, manure was the only way of fertilizing the crops back then. So if you had no livestock, you really couldn't raise much of a crop because the crops needed additional nutrition to grow.
When did they start implementing the conveyor belt system? Is that all in there?
Describe conveyor like this?
Yeah, the bottom.
Very early on. Before that, you would have one guy standing in the back pitching it out after he got done pitching it on at the barn.
Let's go to the back. Okay, now we're looking at the business end, right?
Yep, we're standing back at the business end of the manure spreader. This is an axle-driven manure spreader. As the wheels turn and you engage the system, it would engage dogs to engage your tine spreading system. As fast as you would go is as fast as the spreader would go. Of course, the faster you went, the wider or more finely distributed the product would be, but with a full load going up a hill, the horses could only go so fast. So there is a little bit of gearing in the planetaries on that side, but this kept the product low so it wasn't overloading the drum, and once it hit the drum and the applicators, it would spin around and distribute it out the back end.
So the conveyor system pulled it toward the back.
The conveyor system via these slats of wood would work its way back at different rates. If you had a taller load, you'd want it at a slower rate than if you had just finishing up a load, and it worked its way back. So it was a one-man unloading system. Prior to that, of course, you had one person driving the horses, one person unloading it by hand in clumps, not very well distributed.
And what was the era of this?
This would have been 1900, 1910, 1915, somewhere in that time frame.
Did the design change once tractors started being used to pull these?
The basic design really didn't change. It's how it was applied did. We went from wooden slats to a metal conveyor, similar to elevator slats. We maintained the tine distribution for quite a while. We added wide spreads, kind of look like an auger to help spread the path. We went away from ground driven from the axle to going through a reduction gear to either speed it up or slow it down depending on the application. Of course, later on when tractors came to be more popular, we replaced ground driven altogether with power takeoff that you could take off the tractor. It didn't matter how fast you went, you still had the same RPMs or same distribution rate as you did going uphill, downhill, a little bit more finely adjustable.
Great, thank you. Okay, we're ready.
Okay. As time went on and tractor production continued and evolved, it was figured out industry-wide that there needed to be special types of tractors built for special crops, special applications. Deere followed suit with the rest of the industry. This happens to be a high crop version. It comes with elevated reduction housings, elevated front axles, radius arms. This would have been used in the sugarcane fields, rice fields. It would have been used on bedded crops in certain areas of the country. Wherever you need elevation for ground clearance, this tractor fit that application very well. Now, here in the Midwest, we didn't see a lot of these, didn't need it. You get out to California and some of the vegetable crops, Louisiana, where there's sugarcane grown, Texas, Arkansas, where there's rice. Those were the areas that you see in special tractors like this. Also through time, fuel systems changed, what fed the tractor. Initially we started out tractors running on kerosene, started on gas to get it warmed up, switched over to kerosene or distillate to supply the power. This tractor happens to be gas. Started and ran solely on gas. There are other tractors that ran solely on diesel fuel. There are also tractors out there that run on liquid propane or LP. Again, different areas of the country use different types of fuels. What was ever accessible in their area and required or fit their requirements. Right.
Okay, we're good.
Okay. This tractor happens to be a 730 diesel. It's a row crop tractor, easily towed by the narrow front ends. Some of the row crops had wide front ends, but they were adjustable. This tractor is used as a promotional or sales item that was shuttled between dealers of the time and basically showed the operation of a two-cylinder engine. Everything, we call this a cutaway. Everything's been cut away so you can see the pistons, you can see the injector system on the diesel system, the valves, the rocker arms, the push rods. You can see how the clutch actually engages and disengages. You could see how the pony motor that started the diesel engine on gas would work. Later we replaced those with electrical starters. You get to see exactly what's going inside that engine that you've been working in the field with. You can actually see the movement that this tractor was going through, and then once you figure that out, multiply it times the RPMs that you're running, and that's how fast this tractor had to work, and everything happening at that magical moment to make the tractor actually run.
Now this was Was this cut away by you here as a sales item?
This was cut away by the company. We made several different versions of this on different models. It was a sales tool. It was a promotional item. It would travel from dealership to dealership, from sales meeting to sales meeting, and it just helped educate the customer. Sometimes it helped educate the technicians in their training systems on how a two-cylinder actually works and operates.
So in terms of collector's items, is this difficult to find?
This is pretty unique. This is pretty unique. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. Can it be duplicated out there? Yes, but just the amount of work that goes into it, they're more highly sought after as original items like this one is.
Now, does it actually run?
No. There is an electric motor that drives it that will make it spin, but it does not run on the internal combustion engine like we know. Yeah, that would be impossible. No compression.
Yeah, a little scary, I was gonna say.
So, you bet. Okay. John Deere throughout time has always been experimenting with new ideas, new concepts, trying to make what was good better, or what was the best even better yet, to stay ahead of the marketplace. One of the items that Deere played with was this Model 101. There were 5 different prototypes of this tractor made, and actually what they did, they took an existing tractor, reconfigured it. In this case it was the Model L, reconfigured the power system, the front end, and made it into this 101. The 101 had some very unique features that's very obvious in this example. You sat above the engine, the steering wheel was in front of you, directly between your legs. You had complete visibility all the way around the tractor. They designed a couple special implements for this: cultivators, corn pickers, plows. They also had some front end attachments like loaders that would match up to this. This was played with for about 6 or 7 years. Along the same time that they were developing this tractor, they were also experimenting with another tractor that later became the Model M tractor, again, the one that was made in Dubuque. So as time went on, they found certain faults with this tractor and discontinued this concept. And there's one other one that is known to exist, still is around. Again, they only made 5, so this is a very unique and rare find of a tractor. It's definitely part of company history. Unfortunately, it never came into production, but still an integral part of our history. Okay,
here we go.
Okay, this happens to be the Model D tractor we're standing in front of. This is late 40s, early 50s version. Again, we still have the manual start on this one, but you notice something a little different between those A's that we saw inside and this D. We now are all fully enclosed. This is called a styled tractor. Those inside were unstyled. This is part of the evolution, the design process that the industry was going through, streamlining as it were. This tractor still was offered on steel or rubber. The Model D tractor happens to be the longest production run tractor we've ever made. It was made for 30 years, starting in 1923, finished in 1953. So the D holds a special place in a lot of people's hearts. Being produced so long, a lot of people were able to touch, feel, operate these tractors or hear them in the background growing up. So the Model D is kind of an iconic tractor to the John Deere business.
And what year was this particular model? You know, it's got the steel wheels.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what this was. I want to say it was early 40s, but I don't have a definite year. Yeah. 39 we changed the styling.
Talk about the operator systems as well.
Well, I can. The operator station on a Model D really didn't change from the initial conception. The seat is still way behind the front, the rear axle, like we saw on the early A's. Steering wheel. This tractor has brakes. It was an option to be a brake or parking brake. Back then, of course, these had a ground speed very slow with steel lugs that didn't roll. You could still stop, but they were marginal. Let's scratch that. They were a last-ditch effort to stop. We'll put it that way. Steering still, again, underneath. On this application, it comes down the other side. This happens to be a transmission brake, not an actual axle brake, which is why they were so iffy. Okay. Okay. Of course, as tractors developed over time, so the implements had to develop as well to match the needs of the farmer. Of course, we all saw the horse-drawn plow that we talked about earlier, single moldboard design. This happens to be a tractor plow, pulled exclusively by tractors, not converted over from a horse-drawn. This tractor actually has hydraulic controls to raise and lower it out of the ground. The earlier versions of the tractor drawn was a hand trip, a mechanical lift that was driven off the land wheel. This made it a lot easier, a lot more convenient raising and lower the equipment, a lot less work and effort on the operator. The moldboards developed greatly in time. We went from a single-piece moldboard, like we saw on the walking plow, to a three-piece or two-piece. This happens to be a two-piece. You have the plowshare down here and the moldboard up here. Again, it was a convenience for the owner that as the cutting edge would wear out, that could be replaced without replacing the whole bottom. This didn't wear near as quickly as the actual point that contacted and cut the ground. Through time, we added different attachments to the plow. This happens to have a rolling cutter. We also had something called jointers and knives. Again, different areas of the country use different applications, whatever fit their needs and their ground conditions. Tractors on rubber, the plow was on rubber. The early ones, of course, came out on steel, and as rubber was more and more accepted by the farmer, the implements adapted as well.
What era was this?
This would be late 40s, early 50s.
Does that match with the tractor?
That does match with the tractor, yes. Sure. Another one of the special needs of tractors that were being designed throughout time, we noticed the high crop tractor that we talked about earlier. This is kind of just the opposite. This is an AR. It is lower to the ground. You see a lot less height to the stacks. Going under trees, we also had orchard tractors that were devised. On the orchard, the wheels were actually covered so they wouldn't damage the fruit on the trees, whether it was fruit or nuts, depending on the application. This tractor, the seat sits lower. It was very compact, very easy to get in and out of tight places. Again, just a special need, special niche that the industry discovered, and the manufacturing process worked to adapt to it. Sure. Of course, the drawbar, which was you're pulling. Let me go around front side. Some of the different hookups that were used on tractors over the years. Of course, we have the drawbar, which a lot of your towed equipment gets hooked up to. On this case, there's couplers back here for the hydraulic hoses. This tractor has that option. Again, to lift implements, plows, discs, cultivators, apparatuses like that, corn pickers. This tractor has the optional power takeoff, which is located right there. There would have been a shaft that would have connected it to a piece of equipment. Again, whether it be a corn picker, whether it be a manure spreader, sickle mower, rotary mower, something on that line that required engine or power from the engine in a rotary fashion to do whatever application it was designed for. Now I got to get up. Okay. In late 1963, 1964, Deere understood the need of the growing population of lawn care maintenance, mowing lawn, the days of the push reel mower, and the development of the lawnmower in the industry alone has grown so much that Deere thought that maybe they ought to get into it as well. As a result of that, they developed the 110 lawnmower that we see in front of us. This happens to be a 1965 version. The first couple of years remained very similar to this, and later it developed into the full fender deck and to the lawnmowers that we still produce today. This lawnmower was made in Horicon, Wisconsin, the same facility or area that the Brunt drills were made. Again, another corporation that we acquired in the 1910 merger. This offered a 7-horsepower engine, a 38-inch deck, 4-speed transmission, variable speed variator, so you had infinite speeds in a certain gear, clutch operated, brake operated, true comfort with the spring-loaded cushioned seat. Quite popular for the day. Nowadays this is quite antiquated, but this is kind of where it all started with this model right here.
So Deere has pretty much expanded their lawn care.
Yes, the lawn care line has expanded greatly. We went from this lawnmower here to producing walk-behind lawnmowers, to lawnmowers, to garden tractors, into the compact utility line. It all kind of developed from this origin to cover whatever the customers require, their needs for their applications. Okay.
Okay, Brian, what are we looking at now?
Well, we're looking at a 1918 Model R Waterloo Boy tractor. There was the L, the R, and the N models that were made at the Waterloo manufacturing facility. They were made up until 1923. In 1923-24, we came out with the Model D, which carried the same basic engine design, and that was the typical Johnny Popper 2-cylinder engine, laying horizontal. But this unit ran on kerosene. It started with a gasoline off the nurse tank here, and you switched it over to kerosene to make sure it would pull heavier loads. You got a little bit more power out of the kerosene, or distillate in some areas. This one happens to be a chain steer. They made another version called an auto steer, which ran kind of a rack and pinion type steering, which is a little bit more expensive. Again, they made a couple different options to keep it cheaper for some farmers, and for those who could afford it, some things that were a little bit more easier to handle, operate through the field. Side draft air across the radiator. Like I said, the typical 2-cylinder engine with a belt pulley to run your belt-driven apparatuses, threshing machines, corn shellers, water pumps, that type of thing. Again, the operator sat toward the rear of the tractor. In this case, you're not so far away from the noise. The engine was within 2 feet in front of you. You heard a lot of the mechanical things going on, the valves opening and closing, the tappets, the carburetor noise that was coming back through the intake, all very much right there in front of the operator. Steering on this was adequate. It took a little bit to make a corner because of the chain steer was not a good ratio, so you had to make a lot of revolutions to get the front wheels to move with you. Definitely something you wouldn't want to work in a tight area.
Is this pretty complete?
This one's very complete. This one's, I'm going to say, almost 100% stored accurately correct. There's a couple things that have on here that are no longer available, and they may do with what was available on the marketplace. But for the most part, this is pretty accurate. It's professionally restored by a gentleman who specializes in Waterloo Boy restorations, one of the leading ones in the country, so pretty top-notch job.
So there's quite a few of these around now.
They're around. I'm not real sure off the top of my head how many were made, but they're pretty popular. Waterloo Traction Company had been in business since about the turn of the century, 1900, 1901. So they had quite a good reputation. A lot of tractors were out on the market. That's why Deere purchased the company. A lot of tractors sold after Deere purchased the company in 1918. So it had a reputation. A lot of people liked it. They made a version of this for the overseas market called the Overtime that was sold in Europe. So it was a successful production.
Now, there's one thing, this tractor and the other tractor both have steel wheels.
Yes. In that era, rubber technology was not what it developed into as time went on. Steel wheels were used on horse-drawn equipment. What worked good behind a horse works good for mechanical tractors. So people went to the steel wheels, great for traction, heavy, a little bit of compaction, so low maintenance, no flat tires. Okay. Okay, this is actually a Model C. It predates the Model GP tractor. And in the line of heritage, of course, we had the Dane and the Waterloo Boy. In late 1923-24, we came out with a Model D, which is a very large tractor, physically large tractor, non-adjustable wheels, was really meant for just brute horsepower. This was Deere's first attempt in the lighter horsepower or lighter tractor market. They only made about 200 of these Model Cs, and this is toward the end of the production line of the Model C. This was built in 1928. This featured higher clearance to allow crops to be gone over for cultivation. This is a planter that was used for mowing, for planting, a lot of the row crop applications, harvesting, to where a D was more used as just brute horsepower, disking, plowing, harrowing, seed preparations. A D could do harvesting as well, but not very well going down in row crops. So this is Deere's first attempt at this. They made some adjustments, some engine modifications, and converted this into the Model GP, which they made up into the 30s. 1933 was the last year for the GP. Again, stuck with a two-cylinder engine. That design was around until 1960 when we came out with the new generation tractors, the 4010s, 3010s. This offered a power takeoff to run power takeoff equipment, corn pickers, manure spreaders, sickle bar mowers, that type of applications. The later versions started coming out with rubber tires in the mid-30s. It was an option. Here again, hard to convert some people. Some of the farmers thought the rubber tires would contaminate the soil and they wouldn't produce. Other people didn't like it because you had flats, you had additional maintenance. Of course, all the road departments loved rubber tires because they didn't chew up the gravel or the mud roads back then. So they required less maintenance. Eventually, the tires won out, and we quit offering steel wheels in 1960.
I noticed this tractor now has the Deere symbol on it.
This tractor has the Deere symbol on it. The Model D also had the Deere symbol. It was the first two-cylinder tractor to bear the John Deere name, was the Model D. They put this logo on this tractor as well and carried that into the mid-30s. And in 1934, they came out with the Model A, which carried the name John Deere or General Purpose on it. The Leaping Deer kind of went by the wayside shortly thereafter, and eventually it just carried the John Deere brand name on the side of the hoods like they do today.
Can you talk about the rear wheels a little bit?
Sure.
Tractor seat.
Okay. This tractor will never see farm work again. It came out with lug tires, very harsh on roads, totally incompatible with concrete and blacktop. The gentleman who owns this tractor, when we restored it, he wants to parade this tractor, take it to shows. And to that, we put these polyurethane lugs on it so he can drive it on those surfaces and also load it on his trailer safely. But originally, they had a guide band on the front wheel and lugs on the rear wheel for traction and fieldwork applications. Again, we still kept the seat toward the very rear of the tractor. The seat actually hangs out over past the physical end of the tractor, right above the drawbar, closer to the equipment that the operator was farming with, gave him that sense of control. We moved the engine ahead a little bit, not getting all the noise and the gases back on you. Unfortunately, we still didn't have mufflers in those days, and we ran direct exhaust, so still quite loud. Okay. Okay. As I mentioned, in 1934, we came out with a first true row crop tractor in mass production, the Model A. The 34A was also known as the open fan shaft A, to where the fan shaft was exposed. Things could get wrapped up in it. We changed that version shortly after it was introduced. But this is the first row crop tractor, tricycle front end, that was in large production. We tested the market in the GP series with the GP wide tread. Proved to be very successful, and we developed that into this tractor. Again, this tractor is equipped with the steel wheels. It's got the lugs on the rear, steel wheels on the front with the guide bands. This tractor was extremely popular. We kept the A, or Model A, in the series up until 1952, when it was replaced by a different number and a little bit more horsepower nomenclature. Ran magneto, hand start engines, did not offer electric start till the late 30s, and then again it was an option. It was not factory issued. Manual steering, power steering we didn't see until the mid-50s, early mid-50s, so factory option anyway. So basic mode of horsepower. Wasn't many frills. We did come up with mufflers in the late or early 30s, which quieted the noise down some, but after a day of plowing, good long hard plowing, you still had a ringing in your ear.
Because of the, I mean, in terms of attaching implements and things, what kind of hitch and everything does this have?
Okay. This tractor had multiple places you could attach equipment. You had cultivators that were mounted on the front of these tractors. Some were manual lift, some were mechanical lift that was controlled by the operator. You had belt pulley attachments yet, again, for your threshers, your harvesters, your balers, that type of thing. Of course, you have your drawbar for pulling your tow equipment and the power takeoff to run power takeoff driven equipment. Manure spreaders, sickle mowers, that type of stuff. Everything was controlled by the operator, whether it be by foot control or by hand control. It was all within a 1.5-foot area of the operator.
Walk around this show us again the seat and the steering wheel.
Sure. At this time in 1934, you start seeing the tractor seat moving ahead just a little bit. The seat is now almost in line with the center of the rear wheels. Again, the farmers were more comfortable moving ahead, getting away from the dust that the implements were stirring up, got them a little bit higher, a little bit further ahead. The steering wheel, all manual, hand clutch operation, just like a foot clutch in your trucks and cars. These were hand clutches. You disengaged it to shift, let the clutch out slowly, and away you went again. Had your throttle control, speed your engine up, slow it down. Transmission lever, power takeoff, and you also had a high-low. So all the controls are right here. I can't hear you.
How was the steering compared with the Waterloo Boy and some of the other tractors?
These were very responsive. You turn the wheel, the front wheels turned right with you. About 3 turns, one side to the other, from center, you were in full turn, and basically you could almost turn on one wheel. One wheel would stop and you just spin right around. Very tight turning radius, very easy and nimble in tighter places. When you were moving, it was easier to steer, of course, because of the non-manual or non-power steering. When you're in soft ground, turning it at a dead stop, you got to work out. You got to work out. Okay. Okay. The Model A in 1934 went over so well that they decided that they needed a smaller frame or smaller horsepower tractor to take up some area of the market where somebody doesn't need quite as large a horsepower as the Model A had. So they developed the Model B. This year, in 1935, the first ones that come out were a 4-bolt. The front pedestals held on by 4 bolts, which they later changed in that year. But that made this an extremely early Model B. It's smaller in horsepower, so it filled the niche for the farmers who needed multiple tractors, but not all the same horsepower. And it also filled the niche for smaller farmers who didn't need a big horsepower, didn't want to spend the money to get that big horsepower, so they wanted something a little bit smaller to pull that horse-drawn equipment that they converted over to be pulled by mechanical instead of horse. Again, we still maintain the 2-cylinder horizontal design. Decals have yet to be applied to this tractor. This is going through our restoration department. But you start seeing some similar patterns in the design of tractors. Air stack, muffler, steering over the top. Still the hand start flywheel as they were on the earlier ones. but the operation, the controls are all very similar, and they remain that way to be very similar all the way up until 1960. This tractor happens to be equipped with round spoke front wheels and round spoke rear wheels. Very collectible in the hobby today. So this is one of those tractors that will look nice in this gentleman's collection.
Did it originally have these spoked wheels?
Yes, spokes were original an option. You could get dish front wheels with cast rear centers. It was an option. This was a lighter version, just as strong, just happened to be lighter.
Could you kind of describe some of the operator?
Sure. Sure. Again, with the Model A, which this was somewhat designed after, we got the steering wheel, throttle controls, transmission, the hand start flywheel is right here. The brakes were on each side of the tractor instead of side by side like they are today. So you had a brake on your left side, brake on the right side. Each one coincided with the wheels on the same side. We had the comfortable seat. Still steel, a little hard after a day's ride, but at least you had a spring now that we didn't have on the earlier model Waterloo Boys. They were just spring steel that would flex a little bit. With the spring, it added a little bit more cushion, and you could customize it to your weight. The heavier guys need a little bit tighter spring. The lighter guys didn't. They needed it to be a little looser. So it, again, starting to add some operator comfort, make farming a little bit easier. Okay. In the 40s, we acquired or built a factory in Dubuque, Iowa, and they were building smaller frame tractors for us. The engine changed from being horizontal to vertical. These are known as the Dubuque Made tractors. We started off with the M, the MC, which was the crawler version of the M. Proved to be very successful, and that line continued to grow, and in the early 50s, 53 to be exact, we came out with what we call the OT series, where we had the 40, 50, 60, 70, and later the 80 come online. They replaced the lettered series tractors, the A's, B's, G's, D's, R's. But in doing so, we added another manufacturing facility to our arsenal of factories. Again, the upright engines, we drastically changed the operator station. No longer do you see the exposed steering shaft. It's now under the sheet metal. We have a foot clutch on the Dubuque Made tractors. We still maintain the hand clutch operation on the Waterloo Made tractors, but we changed it to foot control here. Both brakes are on the same side, very similar to what you see today in the agricultural industry. Gear shift lever between the legs, right between the legs instead of in front of you like it was on the Waterloo Made tractors. Throttle control remained a left-hand operation. Here again, we had multiple pieces of equipment that could be attached to the front, listers, planters. There was even a belly mower that could go on this, a sickle mower. We still had the same apparatuses that we could put on the rear, but now we're starting to see some three-point, what was later known as three-point. We called them quick hitch, that could go on the back, that could be lifted and lowered hydraulically. No more manual labor, no more mechanical. It was all driven by hydraulic fluid. Kind of a unique step up in advancement for us.
And a cushion seat.
Yes, yes. The cushion seat actually started showing up in the late 40s over the spring seat that we were seeing over there. Added a little bit more cush, but no more support. But again, it was operator comfort that you were after.
Great. Okay, here we go.
Okay. In 1910, Deere consolidated a lot of its manufacturing efforts along with purchasing the majority ownership of other companies. One of the companies we acquired in 1910 to make Deere what it is today is the Van Brunt company. Van Brunt was into seeders, grain drills, very heavily out of Horicon, Wisconsin. We acquired that company because we had been selling their product line prior to 1910, but never acknowledged that we were making it. It was kind of a, we'll sell our product or your product in our dealership network is the way that was working. Along with the Van Brunt, we acquired several others, but the Van Brunt name was so popular in the farming community that we left the Van Brunt name on for many, many years while adding our name. Our name happens to be on the lid of this one. But they are very well known. We still operate the Horicon, Wisconsin manufacturing facility. It's gone through several evolutions, but that is where our lawn and garden tractors are made today. So again, same basic principles that we use today, different controls, but we still use metering cups, drops, discs. The technology is the same, it's just that it's been perfected many times over.
So this was used for seeding corn, soybeans?
Small grains, your oats, wheat, barley, flax. It wasn't until sometime later we thought that soybeans were working it. Of course, we do a lot of drilling of soybeans today in the Midwest, but this was mainly used for small seed, narrow spacing, 7-inch, 8-inch, maybe even 10 inches wide, that you couldn't do with a corn planter design that we had of the day. Okay. Is this all going to get custom?
Okay, we're good to go.
Okay. In 1957, John Deere went on a global scale and started marketing internationally. And in doing so, they acquired a company called the Lantz company out of Mannheim, Germany. Lantz had been in business many, many, many years prior to that in the agricultural industry, making implements and farm tractors. This tractor here is called the All Dog. It is a utility tractor more than a brute horsepower tractor. They are one-cylinder diesel engine. The cargo box that you see on this tractor was an option. They came as a basic frame tractor, and you put whatever attachment you wanted on the front end. You could put loaders, generators, sickle mowers, harrows, plows, cultivators, you name it, it was probably made for it. Looking through some of the advertising brochures, it's just unlimited what you could do with this tractor. I like to refer to this as our early Gator because of the cargo box. We just turned it around later in life. But this tractor has the optional mud lugs, which is the red rings you see on the rear. It allowed the mud to flow through and not get packed in between the wheels, but yet you could still have additional flotation, kind of like what duals do today. As like most European tractors, it kind of has a buddy seat. European farming was a little bit different than American farming. They used their tractors kind of as pickup trucks, just because land was so scarce that you lived usually in town, drove out to the farm, or vice versa, you drove from the farm to town to buy your groceries. Had a little compartment for another rider or to haul some goods that you purchased while you were in town delivering feed or whatever it was. Kind of unique tractor. Has a little bit of articulation in the center to help make tighter corners, individual brakes. It's a lot different than what we see here in the States, but this was one of their tractors. It was fairly successful over there. We discontinued this model in 1960, so the earlier ones were blue and red like you see here. The later ones were green and yellow. Okay. Of course, we're standing in front of one of John Deere's plows. This is a replica of the 1837 plow. Of course, John Deere did not invent the plow. He perfected the plow. He basically got to where the plow would self-scour. Some people call it the singing plow. He used a very high carbon content steel. It was made from a saw blade, so it was a one-piece, just like this one is, all the way down to the tip. It solved the farming crisis of the day because the plows would not self-scour, and it was causing quite a dilemma for the farmers that moved from out east where the ground was a lot sandier, rockier, where it would peel off the moldboard, to where out here we had such deep, black, rich soil it would just stick, and the plowing, it would not cultivate or till the fields properly for a good planting bed. So that was his major contribution to agriculture of the day. Of course, he went on to perfect many other pieces of equipment, but this is what all started it.
Tell us a little bit about where this was invented and how the company...
Certainly. Of course, John Deere came from out east, out in Vermont area. The economic times back in that era were incredibly hard, incredibly tough for the farmers, and he knew of somebody who had moved west to a town called Grand Detour, Illinois. They called it the next great city of the West, and convinced John to go to Grand Detour to become a blacksmith because the town did not have one. He packed up everything he had, left his wife and kids, packed all his tools, what he could carry, and went by horse, steamboat, stagecoach, and ended up in Grand Detour in 1837. Once he got there, he went to work almost immediately, built himself a forge kind of out in the open, had a lot of work lined up because people knew he was coming. He made pitchforks, he made door hinges, everything you could think of that a blacksmith made back then, that's what he made. They were kind of the jack of all trades because everything had to be made out of metal, had to come through him. Once he figured out the dilemma of the Western farmer, he set his mind to working on a way to cure that, and what he did was take a broken saw blade from the local sawmill that he had worked on, saw it sitting in the corner, asked if he could have it, and he went to work developing a moldboard, pounding it out, and testing it in a local farmer's field.
So that started a revolution.
That's definitely started a revolution. The first year he made just a small handful, and within no time he was making over 10,000 plows each year, adding more work or labor to his workforce, eventually moving into a different facility in Grand Detour, and then in 1847 realizing that he was having issues getting his product, his raw metals to him, he moved to Moline, Illinois on the banks of the Mississippi to use the water as an avenue of transportation to bring stock in as well as ship his product out.
So the plow was one of his first implements. How did he spread from there to other types of implements?
John Deere first started, I'm sure he made other implements, although I don't have documentation, but he definitely fixed other implements because a harrow is a harrow. Most of them were made out of wood, but you still had metal clasps and fasteners that had to be made for it. Eventually they became metal, but from plows, cultivators soon followed. You had other tillage equipment that came to be shortly thereafter. Discs were added to the line. Again, with acquiring and partnering with other manufacturing companies, the company grew, the product line grew, and eventually it ended up where it is today, which we still acquire other companies as a business today too.